live. Hi, everybody. I always feel like it's a little bit of the Little Rascals up at the stage when Susan is, it's delightful, really delightful to see everybody.
Year 5.
Year 5.
So,
STEM Summit, yay!
Since you're doing this, and though a lot of you are familiar faces, as most of you know, like this is a community, and so we've been building it up over 5 years. People come in and out for various, but once you're on the invite list, you're always on the invite list. So yeah, welcome everyone to this. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor this year. We've got Chevron. Our team at Chevron became good and effective partners with us on this one, and so you're going to hear more about it, but thank you.
Super awesome.
Thank you. We love that support. Do we want to go through like kind of why we started this? And
why don't we do that?
Okay, how we started this. As a reminder, the history of this meeting and how it came to be, more than 5 years ago now, was Mariette and I were scheming in the offices and meeting for lunches just because it was fun. And we realized that we were talking to a lot of amazing, great people, and those people never seemed to be talking to each other. So she'd be at like the White House at the science fair meeting great people. I'd be at a Gordon conference or an education research meeting meeting great people. But what we really noticed is that those guys needed to meet in order to solve kind of the big problems facing us in STEM and education writ large. So we decided, why don't we, most fundamentally this is, why don't we get our friends together and have them meet, kind of a meeting, and that's how this was all born. So
I think we have a shared passion, to try to bring everybody together because it is a community effort to help improve education and change the world. And from my perspective, at least too, I think we're all very excited about evidence-based thinking and how that can be used to build a better future for humanity.
And as such, we have a couple of goals for this meeting that we'll just be overt about because it's good to do that. We want everybody to feel here that there is an open and engaged discussion. So we expect and value participation from all of you out there, as well as those on the live stream. We want you guys to also meet someone new. So even though you may have met your friends over time here, definitely seek somebody out at this meeting that you maybe haven't met before or have talked to, and then also get involved.
Yeah, get involved. We'd like to hear what your ambitions are coming out of this meeting, and maybe they'll help shape what we do in the future.
Absolutely. So, and then we've got a couple of
housekeeping things. So if you're a tweeting type, and I hope you are, hashtag STEM education, please. And Susan just mentioned the live stream. If you're sharing with your followers the live stream link, that would be really great. It's a bit.ly link, so bit.ly/2x, V as in Victor, XEA1. I'll do that one more time because I know it rolls trippingly off the tongue. bit.ly/2xVXEA1. Thank you for sharing.
And then also we encourage you all to join the community site. You'll be able to see some of the stuff that we're live streaming in any of the talks there as well. The site is on the cards on your table. Join the community. This is the space where we're going to keep things going. We did the Wi-Fi. Everybody get on here.
I don't know if you can see that. ECC is the name, and then ECC 45678.
Nice and easy.
There will be breaks. There will be breaks.
Yes. Well, and also, so in response to our members over the years, what we've heard, we're trying two different things this time, right? We tried a new format because we heard the days are great, they're full of amazing discussions, but an entire day straight just leaves us drained and we don't get to talk to people as much as we'd like. So this year, in year 5, we decided, well, okay, we'll do half days. Half day afternoon, a cocktail party, and then half day on Friday. So it didn't take much to convince us to do the cocktail party. And so, yeah, and we've done longer breaks this time too, 15 minutes. So again, back to that idea of meeting someone new, use your break time. We've purposely done that because we know that everybody values meeting people while they're here, and we're trying to make sure that you guys get a chance to do that. So let's see, cocktails are going to be served in the side room when we're ready. And I think We're going to skip
time
to
to
be on
get rolling.
time.
Yeah, time to get rolling.
We've got to get
So
going.
I'm going to
Yes.
skedaddle and let you get started.
So I will, let's see. We're going to bring up our first speaker, Dr. Emily Uzel-Church, which is, there you are, I was going to say. So Emily is the Director of Education for the X Prize, which is a nonprofit organization that designs competitions intended to encourage technology advancements that could benefit humanity. Who's very much a welcome member of this group. She brings more than 12 years experience in both higher education and nonprofit organizations to her work. And she served as a college professor at Lafayette College, Trinity College and American University, and she's also been awarded a Fulbright Hays Research Fellowship. So, Emily, come on up and join the group.
And do the clicker. All right, thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yeah. Hi there, I'm very excited to be here today. This is my first time at the STEM Summit, so I will reach that goal of number 2 of meeting new people, because you are all new to me, so I look forward to talking to many of you. I first want to thank you for having me here. It's really exciting, it's a thrill, and one of the things about being here that was so appealing to X Prize is this idea of convening people. That is what we try to do, that is our goal, to bring people together to leverage technology to solve society's grandest challenges. So happy to be here and learn from you all as well. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the X Prize Foundation, for those of you who may not be familiar with X Prize. And I'm going to be talking specifically about our Global Learning X Prize project that launched 3 years ago and is about to begin its field test in Tanzania next month. So actually the images you see here are all from our dry run in preparation for that test. So these are from our project. So first of all, X Prize, who we are. I have a short video for you to give you some context. We are a nonprofit organization based in Los Angeles, California. And here's the video.
We're in this interesting time where we don't gravitate to the possible. We don't dream as much. People have to keep that flame burning.
That's what X Prize does. We set very audacious but achievable goals. We leverage them with $1 million or $10 million, and then we go to the world and say, I don't care who you are, where you've gone to school, what you've done before. The first person to make that happen wins. You help bring about a breakthrough, and we all win.
This idea that innovation tethered to a mission, that you can measure, that you can incent people to go forward.
Harnessing the power of imagination to see a positive future and accelerate that future so that it can happen right now.
We're revitalizing and re-energizing the incentive prize competition, which is 300 years old. The Longitude Prize out of the British Admiralty created global navigation. Early aviation prizes of the last century were extraordinary in creating today's $300 billion aviation industry. When we did the Ansari X Prize, our vision was opening up the space frontier.
In the success of that prize, we expanded to other areas: energy and the environment, life sciences, exploration, which is oceans and deep space, education, and global development.
You can't win an X Prize by making something 5% cheaper or 2% faster. The X Prize is about fundamentally enabling something to happen that most people said can't be done.
When you have a prize that's sort of audacious but achievable, it pushes innovation. It pushes people who would never mesh to mesh and collaborate and create new ways.
It's a way to capture people's imagination and get them focused on a topic, and typically some of the best solutions come from people you wouldn't expect.
Innovation is innovation. It really doesn't matter what vertical you're in.
Whether you've had years of experience or education in the area, or you are a garage tinkerer, if you have the idea, you have the opportunity to get it heard and get it out there.
And you don't even have to win the prize to be successful, because you can win the marketplace without having to win the prize.
When you put up a prize, you get 10 to 50-fold the amount of money spent by all of the teams to win your money.
X Prize reminds us that we are inherently explorers. We are inherently inventors. We are inherently discoverers. We are inherently problem solvers.
When you
you look at Earth from space, the clouds are moving all the time. There's nothing that stays constant. These lines we draw on a map that separates us does not exist. Everything seemed small enough that you felt like, we can fix this. It's not as big as I thought.
I can tell I work at the right place because I still get a little bit misty when I see that video. Okay, so XPRIZE at first was known primarily for being a space company. When people, that's often the first thing people know about. But as you saw from the video, and you may know, those of you who have followed XPRIZE, that we have expanded beyond space and gone into many other areas of the world, and particularly, most recently, in education. So we had a number of hardware prizes, exploration prizes. The Global Learning XPRIZE that you see here on the top left was the first time that XPRIZE ever did a software prize. It was the first time we did something that was in education, and it was the first field test taking place outside of the United States. And that was just 3 years ago in 2014. So there was a lot of firsts for us. But as you see, we have a number of others. The Qualcomm Tricorder XPRIZE was recently awarded. Google Lunar is nearing its final stages, and an Ocean Discovery as well. These are just some of our active prizes. Now, how we come up with the idea for getting an XPRIZE, there's a lot of ways, but one key part is making sure that we have people from all different walks of life. What you see here, Visioneers, this is actually something that is happening in Los Angeles tonight and through the weekend. It's our annual event, where we bring together artists, policymakers, academics, all sorts of people to say, what is our perspective on this particular challenge? So we're not just hearing one voice, but how can we look at what the challenges are and how we might solve them? I see we have some of our youngest scientists in the audience here, so I'm very happy to see that we have some kids here today, and that this is for you all too, to remember that you don't have to reach a certain point in your life to start having ideas and to be active in figuring out how to solve problems in the world. So in fact, this picture here is from our Progressive Automotive XPRIZE, and the young people you see here are high school students. So they started as an after school in West Philadelphia High as an after school program, and ended up outperforming a number of other competitors and big research places that people might think would have done better, so that here you had kids, teenagers, who were solving problems. We have recently, this is one of our Duke teams that's in the Ocean Discovery XPRIZE that recently got into the semifinalist round. So we have college students. So those of you who are teachers, professors, people who parents, please, I would urge you to show these sort of things, tell these stories to your kids, maybe even start an XPRIZE club or register to compete at some point in terms of the, I'm hitting all the goals right now, the get involved part, so I would urge you to start an XPRIZE in your community. Okay, so here's a list of all of our active prizes and ones that we've awarded already. Because of time, I won't go through each of those, but I'm happy to answer any questions any of you have about that. Okay, so the Global Learning XPRIZE, which I had mentioned before, launched in 2014, challenges teams from around the world to develop open source software. And this is going to develop children to teach themselves how to read, write, and do basic math within 15 months. And the idea is these are out-of-school children. That's one of the things that makes it different than other software applications. So our teams were designing specifically for out-of-school children. Our $15 million prize purse was put up by Elon Musk, and we just awarded our 5 $1 million finalists here in New York City about 2 weeks ago at the Social Good Summit on September 17th. So those 5 open source software solutions are the ones that will be going into the field in Tanzania very soon. And then at the end of that field test in early 2019, we will do our end-line testing, and whichever team and software solution has the largest learning gains is going to win an additional $10 million at that point. All 5 solutions will be open sourced, which means we want, expect, and will help to foster people from all over the world getting into this software and making sure that it is localized, different languages, cultural contexts, or wherever there may be children in need of this type of software. So the reason why, because if people looked at earlier X Prizes where you say, okay, we're going into space, we're pushing the edge of science and technology, some people said, okay, well, why are you getting into the world of education? Is this a humanitarian intervention? And on one hand, I would say, yes, there is something that this is about humanity, that one of our grandest challenges right now is the 250 million children, 250 million children who cannot read and write and do basic math. And without those basic skills, they are shut out of a whole world of opportunities. And we as a global community are shut out of the knowledge that those children could have, the ideas that they could grow up to have. And in terms of scalability, I know today is International Teachers Day, so congratulations to all the teachers in the audience. I know I met Pat on the way up. There you are. So of course, I'm a parent, I have 2 young children. I love what teachers can do working with children one-on-one, but not all children have that opportunity. So the UN has estimated that we need over 3 million additional teachers trained to be able to start to meet this growing demand. We know that the population, which has doubled in the last generation, we have a very high youth population. So we are saying for those kids who don't have that opportunity, how do they still get educated? Is there technology that can reach children no matter what circumstance they were born into, whether they have access to a quality school or not? This is one of the Sustainable Development Goals international community has talked about. We believe that there should be inclusive education for all children, equitable education. And we believe that technology is going to be a way to help us meet that goal. And the scale and the urgency is right now. So how we got here, when we launched in December of 2014, or we closed our first registration, we had 700 teams. When we closed our registration, we had nearly 200 teams, 198, who were from 40 countries and 6 continents. So you see that on the map right there. So we really were seeking solutions from people all over the world to make sure we were crowdsourcing this sort of knowledge, and really trying to reach everyone and say, your ideas matter, your voice counts, we want to hear ideas all over the world. We got down to our 11 semifinalist teams this spring. They all came into the office at X Prize, and that was the first time we in the Global Learning X Prize team got to actually see the technology. So you can imagine for about 3 years we've been talking about this, and everybody says, but what is the technology? What is the thing? And we're like, well, we don't really know. So it was very exciting. This is why it's new for us just this spring to actually see our teams demonstrate for our international panel of judges what the technology was and how they are engaging things, how they're using artificial intelligence. I know we're talking about that later in the summit here. Facial recognition technology, all these things to be able to compete here. And as I mentioned before, our 5 finalist teams were just announced at the Social Good Summit. So there you can see 5 of the team leaders there getting their trophies. And one of our teams actually has a 15-year-old engineer so he's not pictured here. So just to say, there are all sorts of people who are involved in this X Prize. And we're going to try to get another opportunity for you all to demo the technology. It's the first time the public was able to see any of it, was at Social Good Summit. So we're hoping over the next year and a half, while these solutions are being tested in the field, to provide opportunities for people to have interaction with these technologies. Timeline, I'm happy to go into this with everyone, but in effect, just we're about to go into our field test. We will have our winner, we hope, by the beginning of 2019. But that's really the beginning of our work, because the solution isn't when we hand over $10 million to somebody and we say, okay, this works. Great, so it worked for this community in Tanzania. If and when we find out that this technology can work, children can teach themselves. And we're talking about kids who are going from no literacy, that are from communities that often are non-literate communities, to be able to teach themselves how to read, write, and do basic math. If that works, if we can prove that basic supposition, that children are capable of doing this, that the technology is available for this, then it is to be scaled to get out into the rest of the world. And that's where we're going to need a lot of partnerships, ideas, and this is going to be all of us. This is not X Prize doing it or even our grand prize finalists. This is us as a global community figuring out how to get these solutions to the kids most in need. Already some of our main partners, we could not do this alone. As I mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization. So we had our Pixel C tablets donated by Google. We're working with UNESCO on the ground in Tanzania. You can see them signing the official MOU with the government of Tanzania, their Ministry of Education, the World Food Program to help with logistics on the ground, and RTI International that is working with our data and doing our assessment and evaluation for that. So it really is collaboration that is across borders, that is across disciplines to try to get this project off the ground. So going back to XPRIZE overall, we redesigned the structure of XPRIZE, and this is a lot of words, so don't worry about looking into all the fine print there, but feel free to ask me any questions about it. So we redesigned our structure about a year and a half ago when our new CEO, Marcus Shingles, started. We were primarily in column 3 here, which is the competitions. XPRIZE was about designing and operating large-scale competitions. But now we're saying we want to really make sure we are designing for impact, that we are able to measure and evaluate what this software or hardware, whatever the technological solutions are, can do. We also are making sure we've added in XPRIZE Institutes to make sure that we are road mapping, talking to people from all different disciplines and fields, and saying, what do you see as the major challenges? What's the research that's already been done? Where is the market stuck? Where do we need an XPRIZE that's gonna have a real dramatic breakthrough in that particular area? So what we are now doing our impact work. Now that we've announced our finalists, we are just launching our impact work right now. For us, we have 3 main buckets of what we're trying to do: accelerate innovation, energize stakeholders, and catalyze markets. And I think I have time to go a little bit into each one of those. So first, in terms of accelerating innovation, we would love to have more than one field test. So our field test in Tanzania is our large 4,000 children, about 200 villages. So it's a large-scale, long-term field test. But we are hoping to have other pilot and field tests. We're working with other areas, have different regions in the world to make sure that it is scalable easily. So multiple field tests, data evaluation reports, and so some that will go to the general public, and some that are also academic, so that we see that people are engaging and studying. We want to make sure that we have experts who are studying, say what really is the impact when technology comes into these communities. What's the impact on the child herself? What is the impact on her larger community, aspirations for the future? And for that, I should say, we're also doing a separate social and emotional testing. So we have our learning testing that is for the prize, but separately working with our partners, UNESCO, to do some of that testing on the impact on the community. Our second impact goal here is about energizing stakeholders. This is really, if nobody adopts it and nobody uses the technology, then we have failed. So it is having people commit to wanting to adopt and use this technology, having high-level advocates so that people know about it. So we want to have whoever is there's many good people working on this problem. Whoever is working on the problem to say, we have a solution. We believe we have a solution that could help. And then finally, in terms of catalyzing the market, we want to make sure that we are developing hardware that is going to be at the price point and for conditions and I know this term has some, people can sort of discuss about what bottom billion means, but bottom billion conditions that we know now, it's not just about developing countries a lot. Many middle income countries, also the majority of quote unquote bottom billion learners are in middle income countries. So how do we make sure that they're getting into rural areas, urban areas, all different climates, and that it's something that people can afford. And finally, making sure that we are further developing the software. So we want to support our software engineers, our storytellers, all sorts of people who are going to go into localizing and adapting the software. So for ways to get involved, support our teams, or as I said in the beginning, become a team. Teams can range anything from one single individual signing up to groups of people, raising awareness about what our teams are doing. Many of them, I think they all have Twitter handles. They post regularly, there are videos from them. Find out what they're doing, what lessons they're learning, interact with our teams. If they're anywhere near you regionally, have them come talk to your students or your colleagues. If you have key stakeholders who you think we should talk to, that would be really great. Let us know if there's people you know that we should be talking to. And then also, there is legislation as well about learning in developing countries. So the READ Act READ Act is something that Congress, actually both sides of the aisle, are agreeing upon. That is about how do we get scalable learning solutions into developing countries. So if you're interested in that, write to your representatives. And as a final note, this is one of my favorite pictures from our field testing and our this wasn't one of the sort of main ones that would maybe go onto a page, but what I loved about this is a number of things. In addition to, of course, the kids using the software that you see highlighted, I love seeing there's a mom who's looking over one of the kids' shoulders. And then if you see on the far left of this corner, there's a mom with a baby that is strapped to her and she's holding a tablet. And there's something that just really struck me about that, about what sort of transformation this can mean for that child if his or her mother is able to have access to literacy and learning, if that child grows up in a community that is literate and connected, and that these children, as well as all of us in this room, your students, your colleagues, have the opportunity to build the future. We're in desperate need of new ideas, of people who are working to find these solutions. So there was something that's so hopeful to me about this particular image. So thank you for your time today. I would love to take questions from you. I think we still have a few minutes for that. If anyone has questions, I'd love to answer them.
And I can bring it to you too. Here we go.
So this is great. I've been following it for 3 years, and I think it's terrific.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
So what did you learn, or did you learn, from a previous group called One Laptop Per Child, Negroponte, MIT, and that was declared a complete failure? Did you learn from them?
Yes.
Okay.
So Nicholas Negroponte has been at X Prize, and our senior director worked previously with One Laptop Per Child. So we're very familiar with One Laptop, and a lot of this project grew out of that to say what were the lessons learned. So for example, that, for those of you who are not familiar with One Laptop Per Child, it was hardware and it had software that was already in it that was distributed. So the idea was if every child had a laptop, they would be connected. So that's why, first of all, we didn't want to have this in English language. This is going to be in Swahili. All of our teams designed in both English and Swahili. And we made sure that the children are from communities where that they grew up, they either are native Swahili speakers or that's in their community, because we know that children are going to learn literacy better in a language they already speak as opposed to a foreign language. And because this is adaptive software. So this is really, people are creating a pathway for all these children. One particular example, I remember one of our teams was talking about how they can have, two children can be playing a game with each other, and they don't know that one child may be at this level of literacy and one here, and they can still play with each other. So it has this very adaptive way that they can interact with each other, and it's adapted to that child's particular learning speed and idea. One of our finalist teams also began by designing for her son who had learning disabilities. So saying, let's start by our children who have, designing for children with learning disabilities, and then adapt from there. This looks like it's another time. Okay. Okay. Ignore the screen. So it is, rather than hardware that is prepackaged that is there, it is software and it's adaptable and it's in local language.
So, when you're evaluating the X Prize, how are you evaluating success overall?
So each program has its own criteria, and we have an advisory board and a panel of judges that is different for every X Prize we launch. So, which also, we're always looking for good judges and advisory board members. That's another way you can get involved. So specifically for Global Learning X Prize, yes. So we have a whole set of guidelines that is, we've weighted differently reading, writing, and math. And then we had different criteria for design of the software, how easily it is, how easily adaptable it is. So we have a whole set of criteria that, and it's publicly available online, so I can maybe post that somewhere or tweet it out so that you can see all the criteria. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, one more.
Yes, one more good one. Oh yeah, so we've already done our baseline testing. We're going to do a midline for social emotional as well, and then edline. But for the learning games, it is baseline, which is already completed, and the endline, which is going to be done in 2019. So again, for the actual winners of the competition, it is about learning games, but this alternate social emotional that we're testing is so that when we get to the end, it's for this impact work that we can say, if we want people to adopt, here's what the studies say, here's that this technology will do. So that one's separate from how we're judging the prize, but it is how we are learning from the prize, lessons learned. And we do intend to put out reports on all sorts of lessons learned that we have already had, and I'm sure we'll continue to as we're in the field.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello again. So I was really glad to hear Emily Musil Church mention that we have a desperate need for new ideas, for hope for the future, because we're about to hear some really fantastic ideas and hope for the future. I just wanted to explain to you really quickly how the next section will work. We're going to have a wonderful talk from Dr. Brian Dewsbury, who's over to my left there, who's assistant professor in the Department of Biology at the University of Rhode Island, and he's going to speak about the role of community in STEM learning. Then we'll have a little conversation about an intriguing area on the program next called What Does Julius Caesar Have to Do with AI? I'm going to leave you with that for a minute, where Dr. Michelle Zimmerman and her student Leah Mather will be joining us to talk about that. And at the end, we'll all come back to the stage for some Q&A. So I just wanted to let you know that that was how it was going to go for the next section. And without further ado, I'd love to welcome Dr. Dewsbury. And by the way, if you are of a Twitter mind, @ BD Dewsbury, BM Dewsbury, excuse me.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello.
It's like you're the only person in the
Mike,
audience, right? That's a mic check.
I'm here for you.
All right, pleasant good afternoon to everyone. My name is Brian Dewsbury. I am an assistant professor at the University of Rhode Island. I want to let you know that I'm actually originally from, who wants to guess? Keep talking. Trinidad. No more hints, man. She got it right on the button. So I like to start with that because I tell my students that first day of class. I teach a lot of freshmen in an intro bio class, and as those of you who are in the classroom know, there's that kind of paralyzing fear of the big bad professor. But when I get really excited about stuff, you know, I code switch. So I start talking fast, and I talk a little bit like a Trinity accent, a little faster, and you may not understand some of the words. So if you don't, please tell me to stop, slow down, and I'll repeat it. I won't be offended, I promise you. I've been in America for 19 years, got a student visa and never left. And, and here I am, legally. But I like to start all my talks with a picture of the first class that I ever taught when I was a grad student. Because for a couple of reasons. When I started to teach this class, I was a graduate student in marine biology, and I was kind of following the very traditional route, you know, lab. Please don't teach too much because you need to focus on your research. This was the advice that I was given. But when I walked into the classroom and had a semester with them, everything pretty much changed. And as much as I loved the marine sciences, I realized that I felt like my calling was to understand better how we can facilitate learning, not just in underrepresented students, but in everybody. The second thing is, we don't talk about this enough, is they taught me a lot, right? So it wasn't just I went and I had an ecology lab or a bio lab with them. I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot about, so this is Florida International University. I learned a lot about immigration and what it's like to live in an immigrant family and first and second generation, and having those conversations that I didn't have to experience in my own life. And they taught me that. They taught me a little bit of Spanish, all right? They taught me what it meant to not understand how career choices made. And they taught me about things that I experienced when I was an undergraduate that I don't think I quite was able to articulate until I taught them. And I think that self-reflection process really came to be the basis of my practice and my research program. So I'm the PI, jumping ahead. I'm the PI of a research program we call Science Education and Society. And what we are obsessed with is really understanding the social structure of learning. How does everything, your lived experience, what happens outside the classroom, what happens on campus, in the dorm rooms, how does it affect the way in which you engage in the classroom? Let me put that to you a different way. We are somewhat obsessed in all of our reports and all literature about all of the gaps in STEM learning, and underrepresented students aren't doing this, and whether it's income gaps or achievement gaps, etc. But what if we would have flipped that and asked ourselves, if 50 years from now or 60 years from now, you had a classroom where there weren't equity issues, where there weren't gaps in achievement, where minority students weren't leaving STEM, what would that class look like? What would that campus look like? What are the kind of things you would say as a professor? What would you teach? Would you be doing what you're doing now? Likely not, because clearly it's not working as well as we would like it to. So we try to sort of backward design from that moment, from that vision of that equitable space, and try to think about what are the things we need to do right now, today in our practice, to achieve that somewhere down the road. Today I want to take you through a bit of a personal story, so in a sense, so my story obviously, and tell you about my experience navigating an intro bio class. And I say personal because I think STEM faculty in particular, we're very primed for tips. We want a kind of a neatly packaged 10 things that we can go and then do, and when we do that thing, all of a sudden, the class will become magic. And I can't stress enough today that teaching, I think, is a very personal thing. The things that have inspired me and have informed the decisions I make in my classroom, yes, they're informed by evidence, but they're also informed by things that happen in my own life. And I cannot dictate what your experience and what your inspiration should be for you. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story, and in the hope that you can grab something from it, or maybe even push yourself to reflect a bit on why you're doing what you're doing. So whether you're in the classroom or not, there has to be a why. And that why, there was an inspiration poem I read recently where they said, when you die, they put the year you're born and the year you die, and a dash in between. And the dash in between the two dates is your why. All right, so what is the impact you're going to leave before you get to that day you go 8 feet under? So before I arrived, it's not a hero story, but before I arrived, we had a few sections of an introductory bio class. I teach at a mostly Caucasian university, large public research institution with the State School of the state of Rhode Island, and there was a big gap. Even though the numbers are different, but it's still a statistically different, significant gap in the degree to which students got unproductive grades. All right? Unproductive grades in this context is defined as D's, F's, or withdrawals, meaning that they were not able to move on to the next sequence of the course. All right. I don't need to belabor the point, but students of color did much, much, much worse than white students. Some classes that was up to like 50, 60, 70%, depending, some sections, sorry, depending on what, on how you measure it. So, we were inspired by some very historical writings on how you kind of think about your classroom. We teach an intro bio class, which is a survey type approach to biology, meant to introduce freshmen to the world and wonder and glamour of the biological sciences. But you have 15 weeks and it's a 3-credit class. And we are not very much content driven. We believe information is free and freely available. And our role is to teach students how to think in a scientific manner. The content is a vehicle through which we can do that, but our goal is not to cover. Our goal is to challenge you to think in a particular way. And to do that, that we have to leverage what you bring to that space, right? I have to know a bit about you, how you were trained, and so the way Paulo Freire thinks about this is the art of dialoguing, actually engaging with the students in a real and authentic way. In today's verbiage, we call it active learning, and it has a nice kind of twist to it. But we've been speaking about this for decades in the social science literature, so it's not actually entirely new. I've been working on a model that is actually based on a previous model that I use to kind of structure the way I approach the classroom. And you got a piece of it when I started, and that's self-awareness. Today what I'll do is go through each part of the model and show you, or at least explain to you, how I've used it to inform my own approach. And that this part of it, I think, is a part that will be very transferable to how you can think about your practice. So I'm very self-aware. I try to own up to my biases. I try to own up to my shortcomings. I try to own up to the things that didn't work a particular semester. I try to learn as much as I can about wherever I am. I try to get to know my students as well as I can so that I can empathize with their life reality, so I can understand what it means to be working 5 jobs or being very privileged regardless of what the situation is. I see this as a lifelong journey. That's why I have an arrow that basically goes into the future. I'm never to a point where I'm the master and expert of all things culture. Okay? For example, my move to New England was a very new one to me. I'd never lived in that area, so there was a lot to learn about the history of that area. Then I started to develop a pedagogy and a teaching style based on that. What are the things I'm comfortable doing? What does the evidence say about how the brain works and how they learn, how students learn? I try to create a classroom climate that feels like a community. All the students are in small groups, even though there's 150 students. We do very particular exercises to teach them how to work together, how to navigate conflict, how to work with difference, how to be expedient. And I try as best as I can to leverage the networks that we have on campus to enhance the learning outcomes of the class. By that I mean, we have a tutoring center, so I don't just simply say, oh, well, you need help, go to the tutoring center. No, the tutoring center actually has a link that's directly on my course page, and they actually have group tutoring available, and so each group can just directly make an appointment via that link. So to the student, there feels to be a direct connection between how the class is being run, all right, and places where you can get help. And that is true for any aspect of the course. And after every iteration of this class, we go back and refresh. We reflect like hell, and you think about what worked and what didn't work. I had a former colleague who said to me that she hated teaching the same class because it gets boring and you kind of go on autopilot. And I never understood it. I really do. I mean, this is the 4th iteration of Intro Bio. I mean, I know 4 is not a lot, because in 20 years it will be a lot, but the class is just so different. You know, you look at the things that didn't work and you own up to it. I know this could have been faster. I could have graded it faster. I need to make my grading blind. You know, all these, so every time it's different, and the students are different. You know, whether they're similar ethnically, they're still different. There's a combination of the personalities are different. And so all that is part of the self-reflection. As I go through each of these, I'll recommend books and materials that I've used to help my own reflection. So I encourage you to take note of them. But you may have others that kind of speak more to the things that you want to reflect on. But these have been really, really helpful for me. I've had to confront my own biases. All right, for example, I grew up in a pretty conservative culture. I grew up in a conservative home, and with that growing up experience, I had a very particular view or feeling about homosexual culture. All right, I held that bias very strongly for a number of years before I had the courage to face up to it and understand the pain and the suffering that my own biases inflicted on that population because of maybe my actions. I take the implicit association test every single semester. If you don't know what that is, it's actually a free online test that measures something known as implicit bias. And it might surprise you to know that for a number of years, I actually had a strong white preference. I'll let that sit with you for a couple of seconds. But part of my explanation for that, I'm not trying to absolve myself here, and not to say that that's a bad thing per se, but it's not about so much the color of your skin, it's about what influences your mind. All right, and so I lived in a community as an undergraduate student where I saw a lot of the negative stereotypes about African American culture being reinforced, and I think I internalized that. But that's an actual thing I had to confront. The book Blank Spot, by the way, is a pretty easy read that explains how the test works, explains that it's basically a neurological consequence and not an actual intentional thing. It's by the founders of the test, Mazrin Bajani and Anthony Greenwald. I explain my own personal experience in my STEM journey. I tell my students my trajectory from Morehouse College, a historically black college in Atlanta, to FIU, a mainly Hispanic community in Miami, Florida, and where I am now. I try to dissuade them from this belief that the professor always had a 4.0. Okay? So yes, when I came up to physics in my second year at Morehouse, that C- nearly made me lose my scholarship. It was pretty close. And this could have been a very different story had that happened. Okay, but you learn from that experience. I picked myself up, I changed my study habits, and I became better. So I share that with them, and they understand that they can do the same thing too. And then I faced my entrenched beliefs. There's some really, really good books out there that describe the running conversations about not just the history of institutional higher education, like Michael Roth's book, but also the history of cultural assimilation. All right. This whole idea of social belonging and students of color, or students who are immigrants or international, trying to assimilate with a dominant culture is a discussion that's been taking place in the social sciences for decades. This is not new to STEM. This is not new to intro bio. All right, and there's some really good, interesting histories we can relate to and think about as we think about how to make our classes more inclusive. All right, so I strongly recommend A Different Mirror by Ronald Takaki. That was very informative because he goes through a lot of very, very different groups and explains, at least from a broader perspective, how assimilation works. Then I try to empathize as much as I can with my students, which means I have a lot of reading to do. What is the background of URI students? Most of them come from the general New England area. We get a large amount from Rhode Island, but the state of Rhode Island is like the size of this room, so we have other states that help kind of plug the gap. And it has a really, really interesting history. Some historians argue it's the birthplace of the revolution. And, but it has a very liberal history because Roger Williams ran away from Boston because they wouldn't let him preach where he wanted to preach. And First Baptist Church in the country is in Rhode Island, First Jewish Synagogue, so it has a kind of a liberal, kind of hippie bent to it. But since then, there's been some very interesting migration patterns and more recent gentrification patterns that have pigeonholed communities of color into very, very particular parts of the city. So you may have some students who live in a 6-block radius who've actually never seen anybody outside their race. So all these things matter. When they come to a place like URI, where it's mostly white and they've never seen anything other than themselves, that's something I have to think of as an instructor. The literature talks about stereotype threat. Very good book by Claude Steele, which is this idea that people who are aware of a negative stereotype associated with themselves in a given situation, that just the mere awareness of that can cause decreased performance. So in my classroom of 150, I have many different groups who might be aware of negative stereotypes about themselves, and that may affect them. The book not only talks about the phenomenon, but it also talks about strategies as an instructor. You can make your classroom such that that phenomenon doesn't affect them. Immigration history is fascinating. I'm an immigrant, so I'm a bit kind of partial to that. But at least this takes from more of a policy perspective, and depending on where you are, you know, the nature in which different immigration policies were treated can have real consequences to the way in which they spread out distribution-wise in the communities. So that has been a great, important book for me to read. This is actually a fiction book, and the protagonist is a Nigerian young lady who migrated from Lagos to UPenn to pursue higher ed. And the reason why I read this for me is because a lot of my students are from the African diaspora. Most are Nigerian, but there's a lot of Cape Verdean, Liberian, Senegalese, and the experience in America and at URI by extension mirrors this sort of confusion between African Americans and African Americans who were born in Africa, or at least first generation. And a lot of the themes that she talks about in the way they navigate the community socially really helped me to understand the students' experience at URI. All right, so this is very, very specific to my group. So my teaching style, I do what I call a web-enhanced teaching model. I try to run away from buzzwords and cliche terms, not because I'm a hater, but just because sometimes when you use a term and it comes with these 10 things you have to do for that term, and then if you don't do 2 of the things, then you say, oh, well, you're not really doing that. It's like, okay, fine. Yeah. So the point of the class is the learning outcomes. That's what guides everything. And at different points in the semester, we may have to do different things to meet those learning outcomes. So I traditionally don't just lecture for 60 minutes every day, but there are times I do, have to give an additional explanation. In general, students have an outside reading to do from the textbook, a set of questions to do before class, and an online lecture that I spend a lot of time in the summer finding good ones. I don't like to hear myself talk, so they don't need to hear me lecture. Go on YouTube, Professor Bozeman's good, iTunes U is good. And that frees the class to actually engage in problem solving. The way I look at it is this. For every single topic we talk about in biology, there's a really good lecture for free on YouTube. Like very good, not just somebody, talking with no basis. So you really have to ask yourself, why are they coming? All right, I mean, at some point in the future, they're going to get astute enough to think, well, I'm paying $20,000 in tuition for something I could literally get in my living room. So the face-to-face portion of the education model has to look at something other than expert person comes and gives you information that you can't get anywhere else, because you can get it somewhere else. And that's why we push the lecture outside the classroom, not just to flip it for flipping sake, but there's something more powerful I can teach you about solving problems with science. All right? We can talk about the history of it. The times when we didn't make such good decisions. Like when somebody took her data to help discover the DNA molecules. This is Rosalind Franklin, by the way. And we talk about that as part of the lesson when we talk about DNA structure. We don't disentangle ethics from the content. We talk about Henrietta Lacks when we talk about cancer. All right? I think sometimes there's a narrative, an implicit narrative about science being always good, about it so definitive and we always have the right answer. And I think we need to own up to the mistakes and the part when, quite frankly, we used it to do things that weren't very honorable. So all that is part and parcel of the discussion. I bring in my own story. All right, I'm an Afro-Trinidadian who's married to an Ashkenazi Jew. And we got ourselves genetically tested to make sure our kids didn't have Tay-Sachs disease. It's kind of weird that my kids look nothing like us. And so we actually do an exercise where they figure out like some of the traits that we tested ourselves for, if they're Mendelian, we kind of do an exercise for them to determine if my son, for example, will have a big head. So I have a big head, it's a dominant trait. Anyway, long story. There's also I do a very, very aggressive intervention technique. And I think, people sort of ask when we get good results, what's the reason? I think that's the reason. The metaphor I like to use is somebody speaking a foreign language. I speak okay Spanish because I lived 11 years in Miami, but if you started speaking to me right now, like fully, I would get the first 3 or 4 words and you might lose me by word number 8. All right, I see this semester as something similar. If they don't quite get the material very well and you lose them by week 3, i.e. the first exam, and you just keep going, and you didn't bother to check in to see, well, what is it that's really tripping you up? They're done, right? Like what is the strategy to get them back in the race, especially if they don't come from an educational background where there's some kind of formative experience to deal with resilience and to modify their study strategies and to be metacognitive about their learning. So you've already set up your course to really be tailored to people who are very, very well prepared. And I'm not with the like, oh, it's the high school's fault. No, man, I've got the kids I have. The kids I have is the kids I have. So whoever walks in that room is going to walk out learning some really, really good bio. So that means when I get to that first intervention point, all right, meaning that, you know, we have a quiz, we have some homeworks, we have some pre-class questions and a major exam, I have a lot of data analytics in place to know, okay, right now you're at a C- because you're not really trying hard on the pre-class questions. Right now you're at a C- because you're doing really well on the recall questions, but when it comes to like apply and synthesize, you're struggling. Right now you're at a C- because, okay, all of the low stakes things you're okay, but then when it comes to the 15% exams you struggle, which means you may have some kind of test anxiety or something like that. It's actually giving me information, so when we have that conversation, it's not just, hey man, you're not doing well, blank face, all right? It's a real conversation about something specific that they can change. I put up Starfish, not because I work for them, but that's the software my campus uses to send a flag if they are in academic trouble. And I give them opportunities to reflect. All right, and this is something I really learned a lot in my time in FIU, where, you know, there was a bit of a blind march through degree from class to class to class with no real thought as to why they're doing this. So they write 3 reflection essays throughout the semester. One I shamelessly stole from NPR called This I Believe. There's actually a link on their website that gives educators instructions, and if you want to use it with your students. And that they do that first day of class. This is just tell me what you believe and why. What are you passionate about? The second is mid-semester, a career essay on what do I want to be and why. And at the end of the semester, they write a third one called Letter to a Future Freshman to give a hypothetical future freshman advice on how they would navigate their first semester in college. Okay? All right. The classroom climate is just as important. They have to feel connected to me. They have to believe what I say. They have to believe that I care. A colleague of mine who's a professor of theater works with me in the summertime to work on my voice projection, to work on things like understanding body language. So that 50-minute space I have on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2, it's hyper intentional. All right, it's looking dead into the eyes of all 150 students. It's seeing in the corner of your eyes when a shoulder drops. It's seeing when somebody might be about to pull their phone out. It's kind of seeing when they're nodding along, not because they understand, but they think it's the right thing to do. I mean, all these are really, really high fine-tuned skills to kind of get the classroom feeling very, very close-knit. I hold my office hours in the dorm. There's a paralyzing fear for some students, especially first-generation students, of going to the professor's office. So I go into their residence dorm. They have a lounge in the basement. 2 hours, we order pizza, and they come see me there. And that's the dorm where this particular dorm is where most of my students live. For the small groups that are having academic trouble, we have group counseling, and that's where we get into more things about how to work with teams, how to navigate conflict. And that's important because I think there's a sense where, oh, active learning works, put them in groups, things will happen, that's good. And there's not enough thought about, well, what is it exactly about working in groups that kids can learn from? And we actually make things like teamwork and group work an actual learning outcome, which means that I do things to teach them how to work in groups. I have an assessment for it, just like any other learning outcome of the course. And last but not least, we have the network leverage when we bring in other parts of the campus. We have a Beyond Biology series where we bringing the Academic Enhancement Center to the Student Services, the Multicultural Center, the Women's Center, the Undergrad Research Society, just for like 5 minutes once a week to talk about what their office does to impact, to help them navigate campus a bit better. Last but not least, we started this sort of style of teaching in 2014. And, the first semester, I would say we were pretty much with everybody else. Second semester, we saw a little bit of improvement in terms of not just the difference between the two races, but also the overall DFW rate for both groups. By fall 2015, our DFW rate was down to like 5%. All right, and also every student of color who walked into that room walked out with at least a C+ or above. So I don't belong to the school where we kind of move this an inch and tweak this and tweak that and wait 10 years and hope something to happen. This could actually happen today. It takes a lot of work, but it could actually happen. All right, and 5% is the average. The class is not easy. I don't give grades, I don't curve, I don't do none of that stuff. They work pretty hard, but we support every aspect of their learning. And then there's this school of thought, well, Brian, you're just kind of holding their hands and you're going to the dorms and you're pretending to be their parents, and then when they get to the higher classes, they'll just fall like flies. No, they won't. They'll be just fine. All right? So the students from my section are all the way to your far right. So there's no statistical significance between the grades, meaning that anybody from either section going on to Bio 102 would do just as well regardless of the section they come from. All right? So the 18 or 20% who we would have lost in previous years now are staying in the major and doing just fine. We're not coddling them, we're teaching them how to be resilient for the future. So we have this in review. We hopefully this will come out pretty soon. It's the philosophy that guides my teaching, and I dare say it should guide yours as well. I'm really inspired by Ella Baker and this particular quote I want to put up here, not to really highlight per se the difference between black and white, but just to really underline the philosophy that teaching as a social practice is about caring about everybody. We can't outsource the problems of students of color to faculty of color. We can't outsource the problems of struggling learners to tutoring centers. We have to take it on. Like, everybody has to take it on. Everybody has to weep the same way I might when I saw those graphs at the beginning. And I really challenge you to do that. Thanks for your time.
So Brian, a couple of minutes ago you said, with all the free amazing classes and learning online, you wondered why are they coming? I think we all know now why they're coming to your class. In the interest of time, maybe one or two quick questions before I invite the next couple of people up.
Anyone?
Hi, Pat Graves. I am a middle school science teacher for special education and co-teach. The biggest challenge I have in the classroom is motivating my students beyond the classroom. In the classroom, they are doing hands-on activities, they're excited, but once they get home, the homework's not being done. I can't connect to the family to explain the importance of them taking it a step beyond the classroom. How do you make that connection so they become more self-driven?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a tough one, because if your response variable is student learning, then the things that affect that is not just what happens in the classroom, but also what happens in the home life. I can just speak a little bit to what happened when I was at FIU. These are college freshmen, so I understand they're different. But one of the things we discovered was a lot of the career choices were being made, were being imposed on the students. Partly because they didn't know any better. They assume if you like science, you should be a doctor. But partly because a lot of families saw these students as the vehicle that would create income mobility for an extended group. So there's a lot of pressure being placed on the students to be this particular career because they knew the rewards that came with that. So the point of that is we could have done all these cute things in school, but the cute things we did really wasn't addressing the social aspect, the social context of why they were a bio major to begin with. So what we did was we started inviting the parents to orientation and invite them to student presentations, and we talked to them about different career pathways that they can pursue in science to get them thinking, so that when the students go home and say, you know, I actually realized because I like, you know, working with frogs or working with animals, maybe I can consider this other career in research. And it wouldn't be such a tough conversation. Now again, I know these are college freshmen, this is middle school, and my wife being a second grade teacher, I appreciate it's a slightly different world. Any kind of program that can engage the parents and get them to understand a bit more as opposed to just sort of hoping the kids will take that message home, I think will be the best start. I hope I answered your question. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Brian will be back up in a little while, but first I'd like to introduce Dr. Michelle Williams, forgive me, brain fail, and her student Leah, who are going to talk to us about some of the ways that we can inspire students to continue on their own. Please join me. So we're going to talk first. Yeah, where do you want to do that? Which way is better for you? That was it's fine. Well, I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask was, we have a really intriguing title on the, you know, on the, oh, do you want to get something up? Go ahead, I'm trying to find ours on here. 5. Here comes the helper. Maybe you'd like to, maybe you'd just like to take us through. So, I mean, the question of, you know, what does Julius Caesar have to do with teaching AI, I think is directly relevant to actually to the question that we just got from the audience about how do you inspire that, that passion going through over time, you know, when they're not in the classroom.
One of the things we like to do at our school at Renton Prep is have the kids look at really disconnected, seemingly disconnected ideas. We want them to be able to see things that will ultimately create a level of cognitive dissonance, because a lot of the answers in this world don't have one simple, clean answer, whether it's in engineering or STEM or arts or politics and education. We want them to start grappling and struggling with those right away. So by introducing something early on, like why would we study Julius Caesar? Why would we look at Shakespeare? What's the point of having that today when all these things around are focusing on other areas? This is an old story. So they bring in something like this, the fault in our stars is, the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we're underlings. A lot of the kids are familiar with a more modern John Green story, The Fault in Our Stars, and bringing up, what is that story about? What does it teach us? What are we talking about? And where do you think that title came from? So that begins that type of conversation, and then bringing it back into looking at ancient Greek and ancient Roman Empire, the history, the structure, the medicine, the political systems, and how it relates to our government now, even through the architecture. And when kids like Leah are going through that process, sometimes it's hard to see just a textbook picture and imagine what that situation or the area or the time frame was like. So we have the ability to bring in something like HoloLens so that they get an in-depth look of what these types of areas would look like and what it might mean to us today. So instead of just looking at the story, but looking at the political, social context at the time and what are some of the correlations now.
For possibly achieve that, we were able to take video and blend it with some 3D geometry near the user so you can get up out of your chair and experience the world around you as you go.
The fact that it's untethered, you can actually walk around the room and you can turn around. There are no wires to be in your way. And that's just something that you just can't get on another device.
My favorite moment in Rome is when you travel back in time in the Colosseum.
And it gives you a chance to say mercy or death when the gladiators are there.
Whoa.
You're right there, and you have the power of the emperor. So if you're talking about something like Julius Caesar and Shakespeare, what happens when you get to a place of power? When you're the dictator perpetual, when you have the opportunity to get a military group out of a sticky situation really quickly, but then you are set in that position over and over again, what happens to your perception of power? And it's interesting talking to the kids about this concept of ethics and what do you do in that situation. Early on, it's easy to say, these decisions are really quick to make. This is all I need to do. This is what, obviously this person hurt my family, or I have the power here. But then you twist the question just slightly and say, now imagine you're in this perspective. Imagine someone came in for your family. Now what? And that starts creating that level of cognitive dissonance. You bring it into today and say, now think about what's happening with refugees, what's happening with this war or this global conflict. Now what? And you know that there's been success when the room goes silent and they start going, I don't know what to say. Those pieces become really essential building blocks even when you get to the point of STEM education. Leah wanted to mention something about this artifact.
So before we start to prepare for this presentation, Ms. Zimmerman showed me a video called Humans Need Not Apply. And it was talking about how robots in the coming years are going to take over all human jobs. And she told me to, throughout the video, to find a part of the video which I find interesting. And growing up, I always wanted to be, I still do, I want to be a doctor when I grow up, but I want to go into the medical field. And the Humans Need Not Apply, it was saying how there are already robots that are taking over doctors' jobs. And I thought about that, and in the years to come, there are going to be so many jobs taken over by robots. But I thought, well, robots are very staticky, and we call them robot-y, but how will they perform surgeries? And then it got me interested in wanting to go more into the surgeon field rather than the medical, the doctor field, because I feel like that will be a job that will be taken over by robots way more than a surgeon would. And the picture before was showing the Hippocratic Oath that doctors have to swear by before they're actually a doctor. And this is one of the Greek versions of it, where the doctors had to swear by the name of gods before they were actually a doctor.
And we know that was one of the earliest foundations of talking about ethics in medicine. So when we go back to Julius Caesar and we talk about ethical concepts, why are they relevant to us today? Why do we even care about ancient Greek and Roman civilizations? And as we're looking at the way people studied anatomy and physiology in the past, and it looked at the different ways that people would be able to see organs and structures internally through a cadaver, but then it translated to looking at a textbook where you would have pictures so more people could learn about where these organs are, but in a different location.
We've been teaching human anatomy the same way for 100 years. Students get a cadaver, then they look at medical illustrations, and it's completely two-dimensional, and the human body isn't.
My job is to teach, and I really think this could impact almost everything that we teach people. With HoloLens, you can see the muscles on top of the skeleton all at the same time. You can bring them in and out and exactly understand where things sit.
You can take any anatomical part and show any of it. You can move it around, you can make it kind of translucent, see through the outside, and that really helped me understand how cardiac anatomy works. I actually had a moment where I found the aortic valve, and it was the first time that I'd actually seen the aortic valve in relation to all the other anatomical structures. It was a way of seeing it that you couldn't do with an actual heart.
These technologies are existing now, and there are universities who are starting to use them. So if you can't get to a cadaver or it's not feasible, you'll still be able to say the dimension. But that's only looking at the visible aspect of it. There's a whole other aspect: artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the opportunity to have some of those things where the artificial intelligence is helping people to point out what instructors should help their educators or students with instead of just being the student interacting with that device. What was your experience using HoloLens for anatomy and physiology?
Yeah, so when Ms. Zimmerman showed me the picture of early people looking at cadavers and learning medical science from that, I thought to myself, if I was living in that era trying to become a doctor, how difficult it would be to learn about the human body. And then as time proceeded, we got pictures, tutors in textbooks. But now we have the HoloLens, and we can actually see and walk around and enlarge a heart. And I actually got the privilege of looking through the HoloLens to actually see a heart. I got to see it pumping. I got pumping, I got to see it cut open and what atrial fibrillation would look like, and that will help me so much more when I try to go into the medical field, trying to learn more about organs and parts of the human bodies.
As strange as it sounds, connecting it back to Julius Caesar and getting stabbed by the Senate, what was going on with the blood loss, what was happening to his heart at the time, it brings that back to have that as a story, but then see it in context of multiple different lines.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I wonder how, for students, there are many students who can access this now, but some can't. What are some of the things that you would suggest people look at?
There are some apps that are by the same company that give them access on tablets to be able to at least see dimensional objects, and we know are widely available at this time. Our school had the opportunity to be one of the first in the pilot with as young as 4th grade students going up to be able to give feedback to some of those things. But in the event that kids have the opportunity to start looking at dimensional objects, there are some that are becoming revolving multi-dimensional features that you can get online. But beyond that, as we were talking earlier, there's so many free courseware that have a lot of resources for people that are free in various aspects.
Leah, is there something that you particularly like yourself?
About artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we take the example...
Hello, I am Baymax, your personal healthcare companion.
Okay.
I was alerted to the need for medical attention when you said, ow.
A robotic nurse.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain? Physical or emotional? I will scan you now. Scan complete. You have a slight...
I'll just move on to that one. This is the video clip that you can mention this at the same time and can again this.
So when we were talking about the Julius Caesar and how it's based in Rome, HoloLens gave me an opportunity to go through it, actually go through Rome. And as we saw in a video clip about us being able to go into the Colosseum and choosing mercy or death, and that gave me personally a different view on Rome and a different view of learning Julius Caesar. So this is a video of a robot performing surgery on a grape. So it's restitching this.
HoloLens, one of the ways that we're using the technology is in partnership with VCU. So kids are going to be studying about the human placenta, and which is really intriguing to the NIH. And what we're doing is uploading, through Texas Tech Health Sciences, uploading CT images to VCU. And what they'll do is create the HoloLens technology so that kids can see the 3D concepts and the images of the placenta before they go into scientific questions in partnership with Texas Tech. So they're going to help do data analysis on the human placenta. So I'm super excited to hear what you have to say about it, and I'd love to talk further and questions about what you're doing and how you best that.
That's one of the things that I do think is interesting, and I really appreciate your point, Joy, that they are just a technology tool. You can have any kind of technology, whether it's a laptop, a smartphone, or anything, and it can be beneficial in the context of a really solid learning design, but it could also be detrimental in making it devoid from human connection with someone else.